I think it's really important to start with to introduce what the True Athlete Project is and what we do. So the True Athlete Project designs and we deliver a range of mindfulness-based programs. And I'm going to speak a little bit later around actually what we mean by mindfulness and what this means in the context of sport. But we have a vision to try and embed what we call a whole person, socially conscious approach to sport within the sporting community. And we want to really prove that high performance, so performing on your athletic stage, and mental well-being don't have to be mutually exclusive. And the reason we do that and we want to do this is I'm going to explain in a second, but really what we're bringing together is this idea of performance, well-being, and then having an impact on the social environment around you and how these things can come together to really create joyful experiences of sport. And there's a few different reasons why this is important, and really the mental health crisis is our number one. So our mission is important because we know that more and more people are suffering from mental illness, from depression, from anxiety. Suicide rates are increasing around the world. But what we also know is that lots of these mental health challenges are preventable, and they also begin at a young age. So when you think about that, actually targeting young people is potentially the most effective strategy for reducing mental ill health across society. And sport is really well placed to help this, but unfortunately, because of some of the cultures that are ingrained and embedded within sport, people are not having the best possible experiences of sport that they can have. And there's this horrible statistic that says 75% of young people who engage in sport experience emotional harm during those experiences. And that's just not acceptable for us. So we know that sport is really well placed because of its characteristics to help, but it's maybe not living up to that. So when we say it's well placed in terms of its characteristics, you can think about things like the universal language of sport, how it brings people together in the same space, how, lots of people will really enjoy doing sport and they want to perhaps emulate their heroes. It can bring about moments of emotion and vulnerability and really crucial teaching moments. But like we said, sometimes the cultures that are ingrained in sport don't allow the best bits of it to come out. And I think we all know about the mental health statistics that were on the last screen, and why this makes our work really, really important. But where I've sort of said sport has the power to do both harm and good, I think the story of Maddie Holleran, who's this young lady on the screen, is a really prime example of where sport can be really harmful. And so there's an incredible book that's called What Made Maddie Run, which details Maddie's story. And really what it reveals is the mounting pressure that young people, young athletes, particularly college athletes in Maddie's example, just are facing so much societal pressure to be perfect. And especially in this age where we're hugely connected and where there's so much social media, and there's just all of this mounting pressure on young people. And unfortunately, Maddie ultimately took her life at the age of 19. And she was secretly struggling with anxiety and depression and just didn't have the space to be able to talk about those experiences that she was having. This quote that's on the screen, I think, just sums up really well how sport, perhaps, whilst on the face of it should be doing lots of good for our mental and physical well-being, might sometimes not live up to it. And I'll let you read the quote in your own time, but what we know is that this sort of punishing mindset, this win at all cost mindset, is often actually revered, particularly at the elite level of sport, because it's seen as this sort of trait of professionalism and maybe striving to be the best you can possibly be on a day-to-day basis. And the problem with this is that it starts to erode your mental well-being and it takes a psychological toll. So you only have to look at the news in the last couple of years, actually, to start to see examples of this where, elite athletes have spoken out about and started to share their experiences of how professional sport has impacted their mental health. And so what we at TAP are really trying to champion is, rather relying on potentially this sort of sledgehammer approach where we speak about mental toughness and grit and determination, and trying to really create these environments where we have these hardened athletes. How can we actually skillfully train those traits and those skills that we need within elite sport of resilience, of focus, and how can we create these sporting environments that allow people to really flourish, and where performance starts to feed into their well-being rather than starting to detract from it. So our mission, based off all of that, is to help governing bodies to embed this whole person, socially conscious approach to sport. And we do this by helping athletes, coaches, and leaders to improve their performance, to nurture their mental well-being, and to cultivate this more compassionate culture of high performance sport. So that's where that Venn diagram that was on a couple of slides before really comes together. And we do this in a few different ways. So I've got a whole list here of the different ways that we try to bring about this sort of change to sport and the change to the culture of sport. So we have mentoring programs, we deliver individual athlete support and have mental health conversations with individual athletes. We provide coach development and leadership development activities. We potentially might come into a sport and deliver training and education within their training environments and their camp environments. And we can also deliver sort of social impact strategy support. So thinking about the wider goal of a national government body, what they're trying to achieve with the programs that they're delivering and how that feeds into the well-being of their athletes. So with all this in mind, British fencing is one of our most important and really our flagship relationship that we have. So it's one of the first sports and national government bodies, or the first sport that we worked with. So British fencing really holds a special place in our heart. And the project originally was only meant to be 2 years, but we're now entering, we're now in our 5th year, close to entering our 6th year of working with British fencing, which is really, really exciting to us. And I think really shows how this approach to sport, this compassionate approach to sport, where we're creating these caring environments, can be hugely impactful and really actually very successful. So we work with the athlete development program. And within the athlete development program, we deliver educational programs where fencers are really encouraged to experience potentially increased self-awareness, where they're able to develop personally and socially, where they perhaps have an enhanced perception of what it actually means to be an athlete beyond perhaps what you think about on the piste of what an athlete is. Allowing them to develop the skill sets that they need to face the challenges that they're going to have in sport and beyond sport, and really understand what are those strategies that they can foster and develop to be resilient in the face of those challenges. And also, hopefully, to, as a result of all this, to have experience improved physical and ultimately mental well-being. And we really, really believe that this holistic approach, so this wider whole person approach, this caring approach to sport, will result in improved performance, both within sport, within fencing, but also outside of fencing. So the question you might be thinking is, okay, what does this relationship really look like? We have a list of the different programs that we potentially can deliver, but this is what our program impact actually looks like for British fencing. So we have delivered so far 2 cohorts of a year-long mentoring program. So 14 mentors and mentees have gone through this mentoring program. Phoebe, who's on the call, is one of those mentees turned mentors. And we're about to begin our 3rd cohort. We've also delivered at 5 ADP camps per year for the last 4 years. And when we're delivering at these camps, we're delivering on mindfulness, looking at holistic athlete development, so whole person athlete development, delivering mental health support and coach development, and really embedding ourselves in the culture of those camps. We've also delivered some monitoring and evaluation. So we've looked to understand, okay, what is the impact of the programs that we've been delivering? How is that impacting not only the personal experience that each individual fencer has, but the wider culture of the sport? And what we're seeing from that is that really the work that we're doing is really consistently contributing to a behavioral shift and a cultural shift within the sport. And we're seeing coaches wanting to really change the way that they're designing their programs and they're delivering their programs and bring about this more sort of mindful, caring approach to sport and to fencing. And so I'm really pleased to see some of you on this call that are wanting to learn a little bit more about this approach today. We've also, for the first time this year, supported at international events. So we supported the Junior Euros and the Junior Worlds this year for the first time, and we were in that environment as in a mentoring sort of sports psychology well-being support role, which was completely new and provided a space for those athletes to have those really important conversations that perhaps they maybe felt like they couldn't have with their coach or a member of staff that was part of the British fencing team. So it was really, really great to be able to be in that space and see how the work we're doing in a training environment translates into that performance environment for the first time. And then what we're seeing as well is that as we deliver all of this, we're seeing more and more athletes just being able to engage with this approach. And what we're hoping to see over the next few years, as this grows and more athletes and fencers and coaches and support staff are sort of embedded in this approach, and that we just see it growing and growing and growing and starting to flourish more and more. So that's sort of the impact of our programs at sort of a high level, but on the ground, what might that look like? And if we take just in situ camp support, so being at camps as just an example, I'll run you through what it might look like so that you get a really good sense of what this might look like. So in terms of support, it could look like emotional regulation support. So when we're talking about emotional regulation, really what we're talking about is our athletes' arousal level. And so we know that every individual has an optimum level of arousal for them to perform. So it comes as sort of an inverted U on a graph. So if you have too much arousal, and I'm sure you all know this, you become overstimulated, you might become overwhelmed, you might experience panic or anxiety, and this is sometimes known as choking. But if you're under aroused, you don't have enough arousal, you might experience something similar to boredom. And often athletes that are under aroused find it really difficult to focus and might miss those really important cues in their performance. So to find your optimum level of arousal, we have developed a model that we call the driving model, or the metaphor, the driving a car metaphor for the athletes to help them sort of visualize what this means. So if you imagine you're driving a car, in your car, you've got 3 different pedals, or you might have 3 different pedals. Rick, I appreciate you might not have 3 different pedals in your car, but there's in a conventional car, there's an accelerator, a brake, and a clutch. And so really what we're trying to do is to help fencers develop the skills and the tools to be able to emotionally regulate themselves during a performance. And those skills might look like an accelerator, so it might be to boost their arousal level. It might look like a brake, so to bring their arousal level down, or it might look like a clutch, so how can they change gears and switch the amount of arousal they've got, so ramp themselves up or bring themselves down. And really the clutch is about their emotional awareness of where they're at in terms of their arousal levels. So that's just one example. Another example is this idea of energy management, and we talk a lot about managing the moment at the ADP. So on a competition day, there's so many different decisions that need to be made, but we only have a set amount of capacity for decision making and a set amount of energy per day. So when we think about this capacity, it can be a little bit like a tank. So we can top up our tank and top up our energy levels, and that might be through fueling or having more sleep, napping. We can also waste less energy in our tank. So that can be managing our arousal curve, managing our level of arousal. And we can expand our tank as well. And that can be potentially through more experience, so having experiences that we debrief, but also potentially through training mindfulness so that we waste less, but also expand our tank. These are just a couple of things. We also do a lot of mindful meditation, and I'm going to cover what mindfulness is in a minute. But mindfulness is really our golden thread through all of our programs. And Really, just like the physiological conditioning that you do for your physical health, mindfulness is like formally training your attention. And it's not just expecting your ability to be mindful to be achieved without any sort of intentional effort. So we might do some formal mindful meditations at camps. We might start to integrate this mindfulness into the training and performance environment, helping athletes to build tools to be able to do that. And then the final piece is around mental health conversations. So really just supporting the well-being of athletes by providing those opportunities for mental health support outside of that maybe normal performance environment support, and really creating that environment of psychological safety for those disclosures to be able to happen. So I'm aware that I've just chatted a whole lot there, and I want to bring Phoebe in now, because Phoebe is an incredible fencer who was on the ADP program for, now you're going to have to tell me for how many years, Phoebe, but she came onto one of our programs first as a mentee, and then became the first ever mentee on any of our programs to graduate on and become a mentor. And she was an incredible mentor on one of our British fencing mentoring programs. So I've asked her to be here today to just really share her experiences and why being part of this program has been so important to sort of her development as an individual, also as an athlete. So welcome, Phoebe. Thank you very much for being here. And if you're able to, could you just explain to me perhaps a little bit of a quick overview of how you came across TAP to start with, and perhaps which of our programs you've engaged in?
Yeah, of course. So I'm sorry if it's a little bit loud. It's just gotten immediately as I went to speak, gotten louder. But I was introduced to TAP through an ADP camp. Sam, who's the CEO and founder, he actually held a mindfulness session. And then afterwards, we just had a little chat. I had been on the ADP program for a very long time. So back when it was the world class program. And I had seen it be a very negative space, I think, for athletes, where at least my cohort and people that I knew and was friends with all felt that there was a lot of pressure and negativity coming from the coaches. And this ADP camp was the first that I had seen TAP or Sam or anything related at. And it was like a breath of fresh air. It was, I think, the first thing that really me and my friends had seen that genuinely seemed to be catered to the athletes' like well-being rather than performance. And obviously it's the start of a very different British fencing now, but at the time it was kind of that transitional point. But I think TAP was first getting involved, so it was very exciting for me. And Sam really took the time to speak to us all and understand what was going on. And I was having quite a hard time in my personal life at that time, and he recommended the TAP program to me. It was the first one, and I was a mentee at age about 18, and my mentor was amazing. I had a really good experience. I was in a very, very dark place before it. I was freshly 18 and living in London and training full-time and working part-time. And it was a very overwhelming experience. And I really feel that TAP sort of saved me from what was a very negative place. And it felt like the first time that really anyone had put so much effort into understanding how they could help and what was going on. And the whole program was just great and impacted me so much that I think Sam came back and offered for me to be the first mentor, and I jumped at it because I really believe in the program. And again, I think we had a really good experience. I think there was a lot my mentee took away from it, and even from me being on the other side of things, a lot that I learned from it as well. So it was great.
Amazing. Thanks, Phoebe. And can you tell me a little bit more about, you spoke a little bit to this anyway, but what impact has being part of those mentoring programs and potentially also those conversations that you're able to have with Sam right at the beginning of your experiences with TAP, how have they impacted your development as an athlete?
Yeah, so as an athlete, it was a little more difficult as the first round of tap fell sort of exactly coincided with COVID, where we were no longer allowed to train. So it wasn't, I think, as effective as it could have been for me in terms of performance. I was training a lot at the time, and through the burnout checklist and some of the other elements of tap, it sort of allowed me to taper it back and differentiate if I was actually effectively training, rather than it just being more is better. It was more, what can we do with less? How can you be less tired but get more out of your sessions? And it gave me lots of tools for emotional regulation and self-analysis that I really was needing at the time. And kind of just an official framework and structure of setting goals in a way that I hadn't seen before, really, from any of my personal coaches. So it was it was really helping with my performance, but unfortunately, just as it sort of started to increase, that's when COVID happened. But
yeah, and we saw that a lot, like with so many athletes. Obviously, there wasn't these opportunities to perform, and where really the metrics of success are so determined in sport at the moment based on performance. I think that was a really tough time for lots of people, because you just didn't know whether, or it was difficult to gauge, am I improving? Am I making strides forwards? And so it sounds like actually by having the support of tap in that moment, you're able to take a step back from that a little bit and be like, okay, how is, sport helping me develop just as a human being during this time, and supporting my mental well-being during this really tumultuous time in the world where people just didn't have that focus or that normal day-to-day routine.
yeah,
And
it
what
definitely
about
helped.
and what about your personal development? What impact has tap had on your personal development?
So it helped massively on my personal development. I think I'd come to a point where I viewed my sport as a very negative place, through a lot of external pressures like my parents and coaches and things, but also through a lot of what I was doing and how I was handling things. And it really helped put a lot of that into perspective about there's no point being the best in the world if you can't stand up because you're so exhausted. And it really helped me just assess what was truly valuable and what wasn't, and my personal goals on a wider level than just fencing, and kind of how to set those goals. I think a lot of the skills were transferable, not just from performance, but also on a personal level. For me as well, the burnout checklist was a really big thing. I had been training so much that I'd actually made myself quite sick. I At age like 15, I was doing senior domestic events, cadet and junior international events. And I think I was kind of a cautionary tale of how to not do things. But I'd become very sick from that. So I got glandular fever and chronic fatigue and scarlet fever and a bunch of other stuff. And I was rejoining fencing and learning how to find my balance again and doing a very poor job at it. So having a coach that really came from a positive and constructive mindset, and could kind of taper me back when I was doing too much and advise me when I should be doing more, was really helpful. And I think a lot of people may have personal coaches that can do those things, but in my case, I had never had coaches that were that in depth with me. And even just aside from all of that, a lot of it was just like the value of mindfulness and slowing down and assessing things in a way that I hadn't done, because I'm a very emotionally driven person. So it was really helpful to be able to say it's okay to have these emotions, but how can we use them constructively? And how can we use that going forward to make things better? And I think a lot of the messages of TAP I've taken away into the rest of my life and still use now on a pretty much daily basis, to be honest.
And your story it's so powerful, but unfortunately it's way too common. that sort of idea of burnout, of pushing yourself too hard, not knowing when to take a step back. And unfortunately, performance sport, and this is something we've recognised within the True Athlete Project, is it's often in terms of mental health and mental well-being, it's a deficit model. So we're waiting for people to get ill. We're waiting for people to fall off the edge of that cliff in terms of their well-being before we do anything about it. So really, TAP is all about giving you those tools to be able to have a more, what we would call, positive psychology approach, a strengths-based approach to your well-being, so that you can start to put those processes in place to make sure that your well-being is maintained throughout that performance. And hopefully it sounds like that's something you have definitely experienced through TAP.
Yeah, my experience sounds quite dramatic, but I was kind of in crisis mode, and I do feel that TAP really pulled me out of that. So
yeah, amazing. And so if we were to shift a little bit in terms of, you obviously had Sam, you had the other TAP practitioners who were supporting you on your personal development journey through the TAP programs. What support did you get from your personal coach, or could your personal coach perhaps have given you to support your development in line with TAP and the TAP philosophy more during that time?
So my personal coach wasn't very involved with TAP at all at the time. I think he was a little bit overstretched with what he was doing, and he didn't really get involved at all with it. I do think it would have been really valuable if he could have checked in, and kind of either with me or with my mentor, been able to say what's going on, what's helping, how can I help, how can I be involved and help continue this. And also, I know because of the structure of TAP, you spend a certain amount of time with a coach. I was having weekly sessions with my coach, so he was very involved. And then it sort of just dropped off. And I think it's very important when the course finishes, I think it's very important to have personal coaches that are willing to continue that good work on, so it's not lost. And truly kind of make an effort to understand like the core of the program, and how it's helping their athlete and how they can continue that on when their mentor is no longer working with them.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And I think you've probably answered my final question, but what advice would you give a coach? So for any of these coaches that are on this call, who is supporting an athlete that's engaged with TAP, perhaps through the ADP or through one of our mentoring programs, what advice would you give them to be able to support the athlete more in that personal development?
Loads of things here to be honest. I think for one, honestly, TAP would be really valuable for a lot of coaches to be involved in themselves. I think the skills and the things that it touches on is helpful for anyone at any point in their life, to be honest. And I think a lot of coaches have a lot of pressure on them and have a lot of athletes that they're working with, and could also do with being able to take some of the things and slow down and practice mindfulness and assess things in the same way. And also really taking the time to be with that athlete and understand the program. Because I always felt that although coaches have a lot of athletes and a lot of responsibilities to deal with, each athlete usually only has one coach. And for me, my coach wasn't providing a lot of the things that TAP was able to provide for me. And I think he himself would have benefited from the program, and together as a collective, we could have done a lot with it. Another big thing that TAP, I think, was really good at for me was kind of treating me as an adult. I think for a long time, and I'm sure Lorraine can attest to this, I felt very unheard by British fence, the young athletes, so ages like 13 to 15. I think me and some of my friends felt that we understood more than we were being given credit for. And TAP really was the first time we were treated as adults and said, what do you think? And what do you think is going on? And how would you change things? And that really helped me feel a lot of value, and that I was being valued in my sport. So I'd really say include yourself in the program, try and support your athlete through it, treat them as an adult, and go out of your way to have these conversations with them, because I think a lot of young athletes are more perceptive than I think we give them credit.
We seem to have lost Phoebe for a minute, unfortunately. But I think that was some really amazing little nuggets of wisdom. And what I would say to just support what Phoebe's just said is that we are called the True Athlete Project. And so maybe inherently people's mind goes to, okay, it's all about supporting the athlete. But really, when we think about truly holistic cultural development within a sport, that is the athletes, but it's also the coaches, it's the support staff, it's everyone that is part of that program. And so, yes, it's about supporting the emotional and the mental well-being of your athletes, but that starts with you. And we'll come on to talking about that a little bit more in a moment. So I was going to give you all the opportunity to do a little question and answer session with Phoebe there, but unfortunately it looks like we've lost her. So we will jump straight back into the presentation. And at this point, I obviously want to say thank you to Phoebe for her support, but she's obviously not here to hear my thanks, but I will share my screen again, and we will just run through a little bit around, okay, now that we've got this idea of, okay, what is the relationship that the True Athlete Project has with British fencing? What does that look like for an athlete? I think it's really important now to understand how we do this. So I've spoken a little bit at a high level about how we do this, but really the way we try and embed this whole person socially conscious approach to sport is through mindfulness. And we've got a definition of what mindfulness is on the screen here. But really, mindfulness is all about training your present moment attention. And the key to this is that it's a non-judgmental attention. So when we're talking about mindfulness, it's like training the muscle of attention within your mind. So your mind isn't a muscle, but attention is a skill that can be nurtured just like any other skill. And so by being more mindful, you can bring about more present moment awareness and attention. And it means that you can be more aware of what you need to be able to flourish and thrive in the moment. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because I think Phoebe might be back. I'm hoping she's back, or at least she just tried to join again. No, she's dropped off the call. Oh, she's going to try again. And if she's back, we might be able to have 5 minutes of question and answers if she's able to get back on the call. Right, Phoebe's back. There we go. Thank you so much, Phoebe. I'm sorry you dropped off there. I want to give everyone an opportunity to just ask any questions they've got for you now that you're back on our call. So we'll spend just 5 minutes doing some questions for Phoebe. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask it while we've got Phoebe back on the call.
Yeah, sorry about that. It literally, my phone just died.
That's okay, no problem. Any questions for Phoebe? Lorraine, yeah, go for it.
I'm just wondering how easy or difficult your coaches made it for you to have honest conversations with you. Did they open up those avenues for you at all?
So I think for me, not so much. My first coach had a very negative view of British fencing, and I think he tried to instill a lot of that in me. So he said things like, a women's foilist will never make it to the Olympics in the UK. And he was very negative. So he had a very traditional view of coaching where you do what you're told, you don't ask questions. So for him, very much not so much. I think my second coach definitely tried to a lot more, and I did appreciate it. But I think a lot of times it felt more like an authority or parental figure rather than really being we're on a level, let's have a chat, what's going on. And so I think a lot of times he had very good intentions, but maybe didn't know the best way to communicate them.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Phoebe. Rick, you had your hand up a minute ago. Did you still have a question?
Yeah, I do. Phoebe, I don't know. It seems like you're no longer in fencing. Is that accurate to assume? Yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So my question would be, did work with the True Athlete Project help you maintain in the sport for longer than you might have otherwise, help retain you in the sport? And what is it that's taken you out of the sport now that you're older? Like, how have we lost you?
Yeah, that's quite a hard one. I had sort of a lot of negative feelings around the sport that I think have built up over a very long period of time. Some of that was from back in the old days and how British fencing was sort of set up and treated athletes. And some of that was just on a personal level of, I felt that my worth was directly correlated to my performance. And I think because I'd been training so hard for so long at such a young age, I was never really able to develop who I was as a person outside of sport. I think TAP gave me that. So in terms of performance, it probably didn't benefit me as much as it benefits most people. But on a personal level, it gave me something that I think I would have really still not have gotten to if it wasn't for TAP. And a lot of the reason I'm no longer fencing is just because I think I still haven't fully gotten over all of that. I think that's something I still need to work through and deal with. And I think then when I feel more at peace with a lot of what happened and a lot of how I approached things and how I was treated, I think then it's something that I would love to revisit, because I did once feel really strongly and love the sport, and I would love to come back to it from a happy, joyful place. And I do believe that I can, and I believe that TAP really does help with that.
Thanks, Phoebe. We really appreciate you being candid there as well. I know it's not always easy to be vulnerable like that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fatma, you've got a question.
Hi, just I want to ask about sometimes coach cannot happen their dreams. That's why they have pressure on their athletes. So what's the how can we make the balance, and how can we as a coach avoid this pressure to our athletes?
Yeah. So did you get that, Phoebe?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's a hard one. I am not a coach, so it's hard for me to say what I would do. But I think honestly, a little goes a really long way with athletes. I think just feeling that they're heard and respected, honestly, is most of the journey. I think kind of the whole premise of TAP that I really love is that they have sort of a cooperative and growth mindset, where you are enough as you are now, but we can make it better. You can be happier, you can be more fulfilled. And I think just carrying that mindset with your athletes, and although they may have a lot of pressure, and although you may have a lot of pressure, it's okay. It's okay to fail, it's okay to succeed. And regardless of what happens, you still have value, and it's not intrinsically related to you. So I think as long as you just have like a basis understanding of that you're supported as an athlete, you don't need constant check-ins with your coach. It doesn't have to be a really big time-consuming thing for you as coaches. It's kind of just building that feeling of cooperation and support. And then if an athlete needs anything, they will feel comfortable coming to you and asking for it.
Amazing. That's great. Thank you so much, Phoebe. And really good question, Fatma. I think from a TAP perspective, that pressure that coaches feel to have their athletes performing and the impact that then has on the way that they coach is really part of the ingrained culture within sport at the moment. And it is part of what we're trying to almost break down. And when I start to share my screen again in a minute and we start to talk about the mindfulness piece, I think if you can embody all of this yourself as a coach and start to really realize a little bit like what Phoebe just said around performance, and the performance of your athletes isn't intrinsically linked to your self-worth. So if your athlete doesn't perform, that isn't a reflection of who you are as a person. And if we can start to break down that narrative within elite sport, then that gives you as a coach, but also your athletes, the freedom to perform in the way that's best for them and to really start to thrive in their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and ultimately their performance. So you almost unshackle yourself from this narrative of, unless I perform, I don't have self-worth. And you start to just look after yourself, and then performance starts to follow anyway. So I think there's a big piece here around embodying this approach and doing everything that Phoebe's just said around valuing the athlete, valuing their contribution, valuing who they are as an individual and how they're feeling as an individual. But that really starts with you and how you feel about yourself as well, and the approach that you bring to the sport. All right, I think, Phoebe, I've taken up way too much of your time already, so I want to say thank you so much for your contribution. Phoebe's on holiday, she zoomed in from on holiday, so thank you so much for coming on the call and yeah, just contributing so beautifully to the conversation today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening. I know sometimes it sounds a little bit negative, the things I have to say, but it really can be a very positive thing. And obviously, I feel that if you're all here, it's because you want to help and you want to do the things that maybe I didn't get. So I'm really grateful for all of that from all of you as well.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Okay, I'm going to get going now. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
See you
all right. Cool. So I'm going to start sharing my screen again because we just started talking about mindfulness and this golden thread that we have throughout our programs. And I think sometimes when we start talking about mindfulness and this sort of present moment, non-judgmental attention, there's sometimes a little bit of confusion about what mindfulness is and what mindfulness isn't. So when we think about what it is and why we use mindfulness, there's also often these misconceptions. So some of them I've sort of written up on the screen there. So around how it's about attention and not relaxation. So lots of people think, okay, mindfulness is meditation. It's about that relaxation practice or a spiritual practice, perhaps. But really, it comes down to that attention. So if you're really, truly mindful, it might result in feeling more relaxed because it helps you manage that emotional side, that arousal side. But it also is about being really present in that moment. And the key to this is really demonstrating that the very same techniques that can improve performance and also improve well-being, and that actually creating this space where people can feel really open and able to see how they are, that can really start to strengthen their performance. So there's sort of 5 key performance facilitators within mindfulness. So the first is really letting go. So this is this non-judgmental aspect. So just being able to let go of whatever it is that you're holding on to and you're really judging in terms of the experience you're having in that moment. There's also this idea of sort of harmony and rhythm, and we sometimes talk about that as flow. So everyone kind of understands this concept of flow within sport and within performance, but it's maybe a little bit abstract as to how we can get there. And really, flow is about having attention. And so if we can start to build this skill of mindfulness, it helps us get into that sort of that place of harmony and rhythm and flow a little bit more easily. And what links to that is this concentration piece. So if we can start to build our level of present moment attention, really what that ultimately means is that you're able to concentrate a little bit more. And if you're able to concentrate for a little bit longer in terms of performance, that's only going to be beneficial. And then the final piece is this acceptance piece. So again, it comes back to this non-judgmental side of mindfulness, of being just aware of what you are experiencing in that moment, but trying not to bring judgment to that, just accepting that for what it is. And when we start to accept it for what it is, we start to be less critical of ourselves. We start to be less critical, perhaps, of the people around us. And it means you can start to flourish and thrive in that performance a little bit more. So the American Psychological Association lists all of these different benefits. But really, when we think about mindfulness in relation to performance, it can really help you to start to strengthen your ability to handle those high stress situations, those highly pressured situations, to start to work on any doubt or anxiety that you have, and help perhaps even help you overcome injuries. So there's all sorts of things that it can benefit you with. And if we think back to that quote a couple of slides ago, where it sort of said, you know, the benefits of mindfulness practice applied to sport are almost blindingly obvious. You've got that idea of focus, awareness, clarity of thought, and that ability to really stay present in the moment. And these are all really good skills of being a great athlete. So that's why we've embedded mindfulness in everything that we do. But when we think about you as a coach, how do we employ these skills of mindfulness in your coaching style? So how can you be a mindful coach in the way that you turn up to those sessions that you're coaching? And so obviously, I would hope that as a coach, you know that the journey of coaching is more than just teaching skills and technique. I think probably the fact that you're all on this call means that you know that. So it's really about nurturing that athlete as a complete person, both on the piste, but also off the piste. And it's about really, when we think about mindful coaching, it's about recognizing that, you know, you've got this holistic nature to coaching, this whole person nature of coaching. And it's really seeking to maximize the growth and the well-being of your athlete in every aspect of their lives. So when we think about mindful coaching, there's these different sort of skills that you can start to cultivate and nurture within your practice. And so we've got those up on the screen here. And if I was to talk into these a little bit more, the first of these is present moment awareness. And I've sort of spoken to this a little bit already, but really being a mindful coach begins with you. So if you can be fully present during your coaching sessions, and you can let go of any distractions or worries that you have, and just focus your attention in your entirety on what's happening in that moment and being really present with your athlete, then you're going to be much better placed to really observe what your athlete needs and their progress within that session. I think the second piece is about being non-judgmental. So I've talked about, you know, one of these key skills of mindfulness is that non-judgmental awareness. So can you be non-judgmental in your observations? So if you're really being mindful in the way that you're coaching, can you observe your athletes without judgment? And that doesn't mean not acknowledging their strengths and their areas of improvement, but it's about how you label those. So can we try to get away from the binary good and bad? And can you try and start to foster observations in an environment where athletes are feeling really safe to take risks and to learn from their experiences, because they know that this is an environment of growth rather than an environment of judgment? Our next thing is empathic connection. And so when we're talking about empathic connection, we're talking about, okay, can you really as a coach go out of your way to understand your athletes' emotions, their motivations, their challenges, and really start to develop a deeper connection with your athlete so that when they experience challenge, you're able to better support them in that and help them grow as an individual, but also support their well-being. If we skip around a little bit, we've then got intentional communication. And so to really be a mindful coach, you need to be really effective in your communication, but also really intentional in your communication. So really being mindful about what you're saying, the words that you're choosing, and trying to be more empathic in your responses. And being empathic in your responses is about really providing spaces for your athletes to self-reflect and to grow, and for them to have that environment of safety where they can really disclose what their experiences are and what they need to be able to thrive in that moment. Our next piece is around balancing performance and well-being. So when we think about balancing performance and well-being, and we've spoken about in the TAP philosophy and the TAP approach, it's about these two things, these well-being and performance, not being mutually exclusive. So performance, we know, is essential in these environments, but how can you also prioritize the well-being of your athlete in that environment? So actually, we know that success is intertwined with well-being, that if an athlete isn't well in terms of their mental and their physical health, then they're not going to perform anyway. So how can you start to create an environment where that athlete can really flourish, both as a competitor, but also as an individual? And this leads us on to our final piece, which is this self-care piece. And really, this is, again, coming back to what I said right at the start here, which is actually taking care of yourself, and your well-being is essential. So really being a mindful coach starts with you. And if you can have a really healthy and balanced lifestyle as well, and a healthy and balanced mental state, then you're going to be in a better position to support your athletes effectively. So we've got all of these 6 elements, and really they come together to help you be a mindful coach, and to be able to coach with intention, with empathy, and from this sort of holistic perspective that we've been talking about. So really, if you can start to embody these things, then hopefully you're going to start to provide environments where your athletes are really able to thrive. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm really aware that we're running out of time, and I really wanted to do a little bit of reflection with you guys, but Phoebe was incredible, and also I've rambled on for a little bit longer than I anticipated. But in fact, I'm actually going to just share one final little slide with you. And this is okay. You've got this concept of being a mindful coach, but how can you actually embody being this mindful coach? And so these are my top tips for you. These are my takeaway sort of skills for you. And I've got 4 different things. So first of all, I would really encourage you to encourage the athlete CEO. So hopefully you're all aware of the call it attitude, sort of, it's almost like I don't know how to describe it. British fencing have this manifesto of how they want their athletes and their coaches to be. And they refer to the athlete CEO in this manifesto. And this is really the idea of supporting a fencer-centered, development-driven approach to coaching. And what this really means at its core is ask your fencers, what are they interested in? What do they see value in terms of their development and performance? Because what we know is that really the fencer has the knowledge that you as a coach need to access and need to discover to be able to support their development. They know what they need. They know what they're desiring. So can you really emphasize a psychologically safe environment where you give them the autonomy to really drive their sessions? So that's our first piece. The next piece is be curious. So this is an attribute of being mindful anyway, but ask your fencers, what have they learned in the ADP space at their ADP camps? And be open to helping that fencer to explore that a little bit further. And sort of linked to this is bring that beginner's mindset. So in mindfulness, we talk about a beginner's mindset and that curiosity. And my advice to you is just be really open to integrating new practices into your sessions. So don't be afraid to try something new, just because it feels a little bit different, a little bit quirky, a little bit unfamiliar. Have that open mindset and bring that curiosity and that questioning to your fencers to allow them to drive those sessions a little bit. And then the final piece of advice is play the long game. So just like any skill, being mindful, changing your approach to coaching perhaps, it's going to take time, and you really need to start to value that space to nurture these practices and to be a little bit experimental. Don't expect it to work right away. Don't expect to see results right away. But if you can just give that skill and that different approach a little bit of time to be nurtured, then hopefully you'll start to see the results. And I'm just going to leave you with just a final little quote that we have from one of our mentors on our global mentoring program, who described TAP as a fantastic human adventure. So hopefully this is the start of you going on this adventure with us, and being able to explore the TAP approach and the TAP philosophy a little bit more with the fences that you're working with.